Hey, welcome into another episode of Kicking Off with me, Kevin Egan. Hope you and your loved ones are well. There will be a movie about this week's guest. Mark my words. Danny Karbassiyoon went from playing high school soccer in Virginia to signing with the great Arsenal under Arsene Wenger and that Invincibles team with Henry, Bergkamp and Vieira. Unbelievable story you're about to hear from Danny, talking about that magical journey to then the knee injury that just simply derailed his career. Had to retire early, but then became a scout at Arsenal. What's involved in working for the Gunners and much, much more. Today, delighted to say, we're kicking off with Danny Karbassiyoon. Danny Karbassiyoon, great to see you. Last time I saw you, bud, we were on a resort in Tuscany, sipping wine after a brilliant wedding for our friends Kay Mateo. You doing well?
Doing well, man. It's been a while. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I wanted to jump down memory lane with you and also touch on what you're doing right now. You've brilliant, exciting projects ahead and your own company in the works as well. But going back, nearly 16 years ago, let's jump straight into your first and only goal for Arsenal. On a magical night in Manchester for you, you get a shout with 8 minutes to go in the Cup. Cesc Fabregas plays you through and you score the winning goal in a Cup match against Manchester City. And that finish still stands out to me because it was with the inside of the left foot as opposed to the outside from such a tight angle. Brilliant finish. What do you remember nearly 16 years on?
Yeah, it was a dream come true, obviously. I grew up playing football in the States, and I think for any footballer, growing up, your dream is to get to play in front of, do what you love, basically, in front of people, entertain people, and, find joy in the game, and getting the chance to play in front of a big crowd, on television, representing a club like Arsenal was really, really special. That day was a little bit of a whirlwind just from the very beginning, because in the morning we were told, Pat Rice posted a list saying who was actually going to be, traveling and in the squad. So that morning I actually found out that I was going to be boarding the bus and flying up to Manchester. I knew I was going to be on the bench at that point. And then, the whole match, as the match is going on, you're kind of just hoping something happens, that you get to come on and contribute, and officially make your first team debut for a club like Arsenal. And then half, as I said, I spent most of the second half warming up, running up and down. So by the time I did come on in the 82nd minute, I was pretty much drenched in sweat, buzzing, and then when I did come on, again, it's another dream realized. You're like, all right, not only have I earned a jersey with my last name on it that I didn't buy, in a shop, but now I'm getting to actually come on and represent the club. And a couple minutes later, the game was quite open. We broke, and I don't have to tell you or your listeners how good Cesc Fabregas is at finding players that are in good areas. And he kind of waited, and I pulled Danny Mills out. Cesc played the ball in behind. I went in behind, took a touch, and just said the angle was quite tight. And to be completely honest, I look back now and I'm like, I really should have given the ball to Robin van Persie. He's made this run into the middle of the goal area, and he's quite open. All I had to do was square it. But in hindsight, I think being the first American to get an assist for Arsenal doesn't have as much of a ringtone, I think, to it than the first to score. So I shot. I'd grown up as a striker. I was in a good position, good opportunity. Shot, and it went in, and I ran around like a chicken with its head cut off, basically.
What did Arsene say to you after the game?
It was funny. Man City ended up scoring, actually, so that ended up being the winner. So it was 2-1 right away. Robbie Fowler scored a brilliant free kick right after, and then we flew back down to London. Take the coach back to the training ground. At this point, it's 1:30 a.m. or something. I get, I'm walking off the bus, and the boss looked at me and goes, "Danny, good job tonight. Don't dream about your goal too much." And it was just it was just a great moment. And funny enough, I had to, I only played a total of 14 minutes or something with injury time, So the next morning I had to come in and report for training because I hadn't played enough in the game to warrant a day off, a recovery session. So I just came straight back in, and I was thrown right in with the first team again. And at that point, the next day's training session had Henry, Bergkamp, Vieira, Sol, all these guys, Perez.
The Invincibles.
Yeah, the Invincibles. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they all watched the game. They watched the youngsters, the guys that are on the fringe, so it was on TV, so they'd watched it. So when I was walking out for training, I remember with Johan Giroud and I were walking out. He had made his debut that night as well. Patrick Vieira came over and Thierry came over, and they were like, "Oh, you think it's great, huh? You play like 10 minutes, you're the hero, you're all in the newspapers, like Sky Sports wants to do interviews." They're like, "It's a lot harder than that, Danny." I mean, they were like congratulatory, but like also being like, "Slow down, don't get too ahead of yourself." So.
Oh man, that's absolutely magic. When you go back to the phone call that suggested you should come on a trial to Arsenal, was it Steve Rowley that called you at the
Yeah,
time?
Steve
And
Rowley.
and he said to you, a young American, do you know who Arsenal Football Club are? When you think about that now, right? I think we were just in a different landscape back then, weren't we? In 2000 and what was it, 2003?
Yeah, yeah. 2002 when I went on the trial. Yeah.
Yeah, 2002. So Premier League on TV wasn't exactly what it is today on NBC. We have football on every single channel you can imagine here in the US. Any game you want to watch is on TV over here now. So the landscape back then when you were in high school just looked completely different, didn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was probably a pretty valid question as well. Maybe a little bit exaggerated. Like, have you ever heard of us? Obviously, having played football growing up and being a fan and watching as much as I could on television. But at the time, you could only really watch Real Madrid, AC Milan, and Man United on television. Maybe I think they chose one game in the Champions League, or maybe 2 a week in the Champions League that you could watch. It was generally one of those three teams. And then the Premier League, I think Fox Soccer Channel had like a review show, and they would pick one game a week where they would like actually show the game. And I remember my dad, my brother, and I would always sit down and watch all the highlights and stuff, and then I would go away and basically just try to emulate what I saw on television and wait a week before I could watch the next kind of set of highlights. So very, very different now. Now in the United States, you can watch more football than you can here in England, because of the 3 o'clock kickoffs aren't shown on television. So more often than not, my friends and family back home are watching games that I don't even have access to. They're just down the street from me.
So you're well aware of who Arsenal are. You understand the significance of a move like that and a trial like that, but you're also valedictorian in your high school. You're also incredibly intelligent, and the idea of going to college is something that obviously stands out for most Americans at that point in their life. I reckon there was probably a difficult decision there. As obvious as it may sound to maybe some of us that weren't as smart in high school, like myself, I reckon it was probably a difficult decision for you, and especially I'd say your parents.
It was for sure. I think, yeah, as you say, like looking back on it now, like I think it totally made sense, the decision that I made. I'm super pleased with having taken the chance and the risk. And it's like, I spent every day of my life since I was like 5-6 years old pounding a ball against the brick wall to do that. And then the opportunity came. So I said, for sure, let's do it. But as you mentioned, like, I think as an American kid, you're kind of grown up and conditioned to think that after high school, you go to college for 4 years. Then after college, then you start whatever life that is you're going to do, that's when you start it basically. So, all the guidance counselors at school were saying, Danny, like, this is amazing. Like, you're getting, full scholarships to all the top schools in the country, and you can play soccer there. Like, it's going to be great. Like, and I don't say that lightly. Like, schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, all these schools are offering full rides. And then on top of that, like Duke, UVA, UNC, all these schools were coming in as well. So it was a really interesting time of my life. I don't think I've ever felt so wanted in my life. I'm 36 years old now, and I look back when I was 17, and I was like, man, that was a pretty awesome time. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was tough. I went on a couple school visits, and I was completely honest with the schools as well. I said, this is, I've been to Arsenal. It's something that I dream of being a professional soccer player. And I never knew how it would happen. And suddenly I have this opportunity, and I have this like clear pathway of becoming a pro. I'd love to go to school, but I can also, if it doesn't work out on the football side, like I can always go back to school and get my education later. So I ended up going on like a second kind of trial to Arsenal in December of 2002. And I got to see Arsenal play Valencia in the Champions League at Highbury, like heard the song, it was the first like proper professional game I'd ever been to. And I remember just hearing like watching the players walk out of the tunnel at Highbury and hearing the Champions League song. And I was like, all right, this is, I can't pass this up. If this is a chance for me to do something like this, then I can't pass this up.
What was the perception of being an American like when you landed there? Look, we know about Clint Dempsey, we know about Brad Friedel, and many of the guys like Casey Keller that were there already or there before you. But what was it like for you? You land into that dressing room with that culture, and you're the one American guy. Was there any stories to stand out?
Um, I think it's difficult. I think one of the reasons um, not to just reference my book, but one of the reasons I wrote it was because I think more and more players are starting to go abroad, and parents, have the opportunity to, like, where clubs come in for their children and they send them abroad, and like it was mostly as like a way to educate
Yeah.
people that have no idea what they're going into, what it's going to be like, basically. Like I was a little bit naive in thinking, like, when I went to Arsenal, I was like, okay, great. Like, now I'm going to be in an environment where, all the players are going to be buzzing that there's a new player in town, when in reality, like, it's such a competitive environment. There's nothing wrong. This is how it is at any professional, club or environment, but like, everybody's fighting for a spot. Everybody's fighting for a new contract. I think, and I came in and essentially replaced a boy that had been there since he was, I think, 9 years old in the under nines, like, and he'd come all the way up. And then when it was time to get offered a pro contract, I basically got offered a pro contract, and he ended up, going out on loan and then eventually getting released. So, they've built pretty good relationships with all their teammates around this. So, like, I'm not the guy that's going to come in and be like, oh, everybody's buzzing to see me, the guy that's come in from the US they've never heard of or met, and suddenly he's just thrown into the team, basically. And I'm talking about, this was in the reserves at this time. So, yeah, it was a huge learning curve. Like, my first year was understanding like how to live in England away from home. I was 6,000 miles away from where I grew up, what I was comfortable with. The weather here, as and can attest to, is not like the nicest place in the world, especially in the wintertime. And just kind of getting accustomed to, dark, gray, rainy days for, 5 months at a time was pretty challenging. So I found transitioning quite hard. And then back to your question, like, the whole idea of, like, how do kind of players accept you? I think the important thing is like, as long as you're able to play and provide value, and they realize that you can retain possession and that you actually, like, improve the standard on the pitch, then people will start giving you the ball. People will start trusting you. People will start, giving you the ball when they're under pressure, because they believe that you can get them out of trouble. So it took a little bit to build or to earn people's trust, but once I did, I started enjoying the football much, much more, and really, really kind of grasped the opportunity and was thrilled to be there.
Right, I'm going to become a real football fan here as opposed to a broadcaster or a journalist. What was Arsene Wenger like? What was he really like?
Arsene was, he still is an amazing football person, an amazing person too. I think, like, one of the coolest things about him was how kind of philosophical and how intelligent he was, not just on the football side, but kind of this, like, all-encompassing intelligence about a variety of verticals within the world, which, as football can sometimes be very just, like, football oriented, especially managers are so, like, obsessed with the game that there's no time for anything else. Arsene, like, I think he just understood how to simplify things really, really well. So from a football perspective, an example, like, I remember it was, like, probably my third or fourth training session with the first team, and I was playing left back. And I think Kolo Toure, like, played me a ball around the back, and I took a touch, and then I played it on to Robert Perez. And there was no pressure. There was no, like, I wasn't under pressure. We were just switching the point of attack basically around the back. And he stopped it and asked me, this is in front of the Invincibles. He just asks me, Danny, why did you take your first touch? And I didn't really have a good answer. I was just like, I took the touch just to, get it under control and then make my decision. And he said, well, if you don't take that touch and you play it first time, then Robert has an opportunity to run at the defense much quicker and then catch the opposition out. So it was funny because it's a simple like concept, right? But I think it's a concept that a lot of coaches might just be, like, happy with just saying, okay, like, we're slowly working out of the back. Whereas it was always like, boom, let's go. And you'd see, especially in the Invincibles, where suddenly, like, we'd have two or three passes out of the back, then all of a sudden it's like, bam. And, like, we're scoring a goal on the other side. So, that stuff was amazing. I remember, and again, like, when from a personal side, like, when we were in Manchester, when I made my debut, I was in the elevator and I was going down to get our pre-match meal, and Arsene entered the elevator as well, and it was just us two. And he said, "Danny, are you excited about tonight?" And I was like, yeah. And he said, "Oh yeah, I wanted to ask, like, how are your Italian lessons going?" And I was taking Italian lesson. My mom's Italian. I speak Italian, but I was away from her, so I was just kind of like keeping it going. And he just knew that I was taking, like, it's not like I told him, like, hey boss, like, I'm going to be taking Italian from here on, moving forward. And he just knew, because he knew kind of his players, knew what was going on. I just found that really, like, pretty interesting, especially compared to some of the other, as I started to learn what other managers were like and whatnot. I just thought it was really, really interesting.
That's magic, because it kind of reminded me of my own father played for the Dublin Gaelic football team. They won 2 All-Irelands. He won 2 All-Irelands. They won many more during that era. And I asked him why that team was so successful. And he said, if you really look through every player, most likely in that squad, they're intelligent people. And they all, after playing, were doctors, were, solicitors. And he said it was just an intelligent group that knew how to win. And that Arsenal team, when you really look at some games that they were in, like 12 draws that season, 26 wins, 12 draws, yet didn't know how to lose, it seemed. What was it about the culture that you were surrounded in and immersed in that just screamed excellence?
I mean, the winning, like, that's a great point. The winning mentality in those players was just ridiculous, right? I mean, they, like, if you look at the starting lineup, the I guess, like, composed of the Invincibles, the players that played the most, like, they were just, like, so focused on winning and just not losing, and that came across not only in the matches, obviously, but then also in training. Like, I remember a couple times, I mean, you'd see it obviously firsthand when you were training with the first team, just how even all the small-sided games, how much it meant to win. And even, I'll take it a step further. Like, I remember I was coming back from injury once, and I was training with our technical director now, Edu, who was a player then, and it was just us two. I think maybe one other player, and we were doing this passing drill around mannequins, and I was, like, playing balls into Edu, and Edu, like, pinged one back at me and was like, "Danny, like, hit it harder." And there's no like, the fitness coach was there with us, like the fitness physio coach was there with us, and then just 3 other guys, like 3 players, right? And, like, their just desire to, like, consistently just, like, test themselves and push themselves was just incredible. Like, Martin Keown trained with the reserves one Saturday, I remember, and he was on my team, and, like, I think we ended up losing one of the small-sided games, and he just, like, he lost it and was, like, grabbing us and being like, "We don't lose this next," like, and it was just really impressive, because as a kid, I think it's hard when suddenly you go, especially from, like, Roanoke, Virginia, suddenly I'm playing at Arsenal, where the pitches are like the best fairways you've ever seen in a golf course. Like several of the pitches at Arsenal are actually heated. Everything that you wanted was there, and, like, it's very easy, I think, just to be like, all right, I've made it, and then you see a guy like Martin, who at the time was probably like 35 or 36, I think, like, in his finals.
It was Campbell and Toure were the starting centre backs that year.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And Martin was just still just getting after it and fighting. And I think, I say these little training things, and then you go to the actual matches, and there was just this air during games at Highbury where even if we went down a goal to, like, one of the top teams at the time, United or Chelsea, like, the crowd was just like, all right, well, I wonder how long it'll take for us to score now, like, and it was just like this, like, mentality, and the players didn't, they didn't crumble. They just kept, they kept going, even when, like, that record was just always kind of under threat, and, like, it gets harder and harder as you get closer to the end of the season, like, because every game is nerve wracking. But yeah, they were as cool as a cucumber, man. All of them. They were all just fighters and winners.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, was about those final few games. And was there a sense of nervousness that set in, or was it just, right, we know what to do here, guys, let's keep going?
I don't know. I don't know if the players were actually, if they were nervous. I think they were certainly aware of what was happening and how, like, special it was. But they definitely, like, they seem to just take it game by game. It would have been silly to say we have 5 games left. We just have to win 5 games, because every single game is a different test. Every single game is a different challenge. And that was at a time too where, like, I don't want to say tactically things were different, but, like, most teams played 4-4-2. and like basically Arsenal were like, we'll outplay you guys. Like we'll be better than you guys, you know, like with the way that we play. So it was a little bit different in that regard, but yeah, they just took every game kind of in stride. And as I said, if they went down a goal or needed a goal, like they would find a way to get it and then go from there. They were just absolute champions.
Yeah, celebrations at the end of the year. Any memories?
Yeah, I mean, I was this was like the longest stretch that I've ever been away from home, right? So at the end of the first season, I wasn't really a part of that, like in like that year where they went unbeaten. I trained with the first team a couple times in my first year, but by no means was I, in the first team squad. But yeah,
It's a tough time for you to join Arsenal. Let's be honest. It's brilliant, but at the same time, you're like, how am I going to get in here?
Yeah, it was to be honest, like I consider myself still remarkably lucky to be there at that time, because it is a double-edged sword, right? Like the odds of getting into that first team were just ridiculous. I mean, I went as a striker, and I don't even consider myself having been in the pecking order, because there was like, Henri Bergkamp, Sylvain Viltord, Canu, Jeremy Alliadier, like Quincy Usube, David Bentley, like the list just kept going. And then the next year they signed Van Persie and Jose Antonio Reyes. I mean, like it was outrageous. So when people are like, oh yeah, what number were you, in the pecking order? I was like, I wasn't in the pecking order. I was in a whole different, I was in a whole different coop basically. So I ended up playing. I switched to left back at the end of that first season. The boss came over to a reserve team training session and asked the reserve team manager, he said, can you play Danny at left back this coming week, basically? So I had never defended or played left back in my life. So I
noticed that. So in the game after you scored in the cup, you ended up playing at left back for 90 minutes against Everton.
Yeah, so that transition happened at the end of my first season. I finished like playing the last 5 games of the reserves, I think, as a left back. Huge learning curve. Obviously, like you go from being like a center forward to where you're in the middle of the pitch, generally you're running in behind, to suddenly you're kind of in a corner of the pitch, and you have your back to the stands, but like you can see everything, but it's just a very different place on the pitch, obviously, and learning like how to defend, when to commit myself, when to go forward, when to hold, when to cover, all these things I just never really dealt with as a striker. So that was a big transition. And then, but again, I went from being, 10th in line as a striker to behind Ashley Cole and Gal Clichy. So Clichy was a year younger than me and about 1,000 times better than me. And Ashley Cole at the time was like 23 years old. So I was fortunate, not for them, but I was fortunate that they kept getting injured back to like one after the other my second year at the club, which was the year that I ended up, playing a couple games in the first team and training with the first team basically every day. But it was just such a challenging environment, right? These guys, like, you look up to them and you say, like, I want to be like Ashley Cole, like, when you're playing left back and you're 20 years old, and then you realize like Ashley's 20, as I said, he's like 23 years old, and he's like, I don't want you to be where I am, because I want to be the starting left back. So there's just like a very professional, like level of respect, and also like competition that's happening, at that level. And always, as there's so many stories that have happened where a player gets injured and then the player behind him ends up taking his spot and making it his own. So it was tough, but I ended up switching over to left back and getting minutes there, which I was super pleased about.
You're now, aside from your business, you're now scouting with Arsenal. You have been for a long time. Danny, how important is it when you're looking at that Arsenal team and those amount of that amount of winners in that team, with Keown, as you mentioned, even Ashley Cole, such a winner, such a competitor. Ray Parlour was someone who played an awful lot, was a character, I'm sure, that offered something completely different at times in the dressing room. When I see certain teams now, particularly in Major League Soccer, you see turnover happen an awful lot quicker. And when a roster, say, wins, you've got to refresh in the squad because everyone wants a raise, and it can't happen in a single entity structure. How important is personality when you're scouting? Because oftentimes you'll see a big personality leave and replaced with a very good player, but wouldn't have those same attributes off the field and on as well. But how difficult is that ingredient to find?
It is tough. I mean, I think like you definitely have to have a lot of personality to make it in a league like the Premier League. And I'm not cheapening, other leagues by any means, but like just the scrutiny on players here. You're always in the press if you mess up, in your personal life or in your on the footballing side. Like you need to have a strong personality that can deal with, just as I mentioned, like the competition side of things. You have to be strong to be able to deal with, again, the fact that, I mentioned the weather and like the lifestyle.
The sideways rain.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not even raining and you're still wet. I'll never understand it.
I don't understand. Like it's a wet that my mom would always say. As I said, she's from Naples in Italy, and she always says like it's a wet that gets into your bones, and it's true. Like, I don't know. Like it won't be raining, and you get home and you're like, I need to change because I'm wet somehow. Like
Meg says the same thing. Meg says, why don't they heat the toilets in public places? They don't have any heating in any bathrooms, and she goes to the toilet and she comes out like this, going, "Why am I so cold?"
Yeah, exactly. But like again, like I'd always when I was specifically covering CONCACAF when I was scouting, it's interesting if you go. Let's say you go to LA and you watch a player and a kid's grown up in LA, and I use LA as an example because the weather's phenomenal there, as we all know. But you go to LA, 70 degrees, the kid's grown up in nice temperature their whole life. They played on really nice pitches for a majority of their life. Like they're comfortable where they are, and then all of a sudden you pluck them from there. They're 8-hour time difference from back home. Like the sun's not shining as much anymore. I mean, although it is nice outside today, but like during the winter time, as I said, it just gets dark. Like you just have to be able to cope with it. And you talk about like character and stuff like that's people that really want to be a footballer and really want to make it in England, like are willing to make those sacrifices. Those are the guys that you want. To go back to like the Invincibles and stuff, it was like there was a perfect mix of like those characters as well in that team. You mentioned Ray Parlour, for example, and Martin Keown. Like those were like English steel within the team, and then like there was also like and not just English steel, but also like class as well. Like Parlour scored some absolutely remarkable goals for Arsenal during his time, and then you kind of mix that with the the elegance of Perez, the elegance of Henri, and then the brute leadership of Vieira, who technically was exceptional as well, but was also just like you just get behind Vieira, tell me where you want me to go and I'll go, Patrick. So I think like yeah, it's massively important, and there are a lot of good footballers in the world, and when you go and scout and watch players, but you want to see personality, you want to see what guys are like when your team's down 3-0. Are they the guys that just hang their heads and are saying like, oh, we've scored on again, and they're pointing fingers? Or are they the guys that are looking at their teammates saying like, guys, come on, like there's a little bit of time left, we can do this, so those are definitely, I think, very, very kind of overlooked features when scouts go watch games. They're looking for those things because they're really, really important.
And I reckon digging into the parents and the history of the family probably plays a role somewhere along the line. I look at you and you're someone who rolls with the punches. Life is unscripted for you, for all of us. But for you, your story is very much unscripted. You didn't plan on going to Arsenal. It wasn't part of the plan when you were 16, 17. What about afterwards? Scouting wasn't part of the plan. I think you were planning on going to college, right? And coming back and playing in Major League Soccer. Unscripted again, and probably has something to do with your parents and their heritage and the past with Iranian heritage and Italian heritage, right? And the ability to look at the world as a destination rather than your own little comfort.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm very lucky. As I said, my mom is Italian. My dad was born and raised in Iran. They both met at university in the United States, and then moved down to Virginia for work as well. So I think that's always helped me just be really open-minded about things. Southwest Virginia, I won't criticize it by any means. I absolutely love Southwest Virginia, but it's certainly not like one of the biggest like mixing pots, in the United States. So having kind of foreign parents and just being exposed to different things, I think helped me a lot. And I think like again, like having an open mind and seeing, I don't want to just like see wherever it takes you, but having an open mind and saying like, well, if I try this, I understand it's a huge risk, but let's see, something great can happen from this. So like, let's see what happens, and calculating those risks and going with them. So I agree, like that helps, again, that helps massively. You don't need to have foreign parents to be open-minded and like be eager to try different things either, by the way. I can guarantee you that.
No, it certainly helps. And your mom's a go-getter, right? She started her own business.
Yeah, she is. Yeah. I think, again, I think I learned a lot. I attribute a lot of kind of just my mentality and my desire to fight and always work and like continue working and like pushing myself. I think from them. Yeah, my dad used to design night vision goggles for the military for ITT. My mom used to be a professor at Roanoke College, and then she quit her job to start a printing and copying shop and was working, 20-hour days basically. My dad was working both jobs, doing the night vision goggle stuff, and then coming after work to help with my mom. And then my brother and I were like sleeping in sleeping bags underneath their desks basically for a little bit, and like I kind of saw that, and then I said, if I want to make it, like I have to apply this sort of work ethic and like desire to succeed to whatever it is that I want to do in my life.
Yeah, it gives you humility. You go to Arsenal, you're a striker, and you get asked to play left back, and you're like, "Yes, sir. No, sir. No problem."
At that
Whatever.
point, I just want to be on the pitch. I'm just happy
Yeah,
to be on
exactly, exactly. How difficult was it? I'm going backwards a little bit here, but how difficult was it to deal with the injury? And you were told that your knee is knackered, was the word the doctor used, and that you'll essentially be in trouble later down the line if you continue to play. How difficult was the week or two after that, and who did you lean on for support in terms of mental health? That's not an easy thing to get hit with.
Yeah, so if we're talking about like the top end moments of my career where I get to make my debut and the realization of dreams, then I think another big thing I stress in my book is that like professional careers aren't just what you see on a Saturday for 90 minutes on NBC Sports. There's people are doing stuff on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like the whole every day there's something happening, and it's not always just the peak of the roller coaster. There's huge valleys, and when I was told by the doctor in Bolton that I'd gone to Burnley at this point, I'd left Arsenal, I was playing at Burnley. I was told by a doctor in Bolton, he said, "Look, Danny, we've done a scan on your knee," and I'm 22. I think I'm 22 years old at this point. So he said, "We've done a scan on your knee," and he said, "The good news is there's nothing like structurally, like we can't really operate. We shouldn't really have to operate." But he said, "Your joint is just knackered," and he said, "If you should have hung. You said you should hang up your boots like yesterday, basically." And he said, "If you want to walk when you're 30, then you should definitely hang up your boots." So yeah, I mean that's as a 22-year-old, that's pretty. I think as a even as a 36-year-old, if somebody said that to me now, it's a pretty tough pill to swallow. I didn't want to believe anything of it at all. I remember I got back in the car with our physio who had driven me to the specialist, and he said, "Wow, that's a lot, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's not great stuff." But at the time, I was reading like all these, all the Lance Armstrong books about back on the bike, like getting back in the bike, and like after all the surgery and cancer, and I was just like, "Look, man, if he can, if he's able to like continue fighting after all this stuff, surely I can get myself back where I need to be." And I ended up getting out of my contract at Burnley, went back to the U.S. Went down to one of the surgeons in Miami that I had surgery with previously. He did a scan on my knee, looked and said, "Yeah, it's not great, but maybe if we build up your quad and get you just like strong again, like in a couple weeks time, you'll be comfortable again." And it just didn't happen, unfortunately. Like I kept doing it. And like my knee just, I couldn't stand for like 10 minutes without looking for a chair, just being bothered essentially. So,
So accepting it probably became a little bit easier when it was so painful.
Yeah. I mean, I went to after the Miami doctor, I went to see DC United's doctor, and he was like, "Danny, like we can, I could operate and make you more comfortable right now, and then I don't know if we'd have to operate again in 6 weeks or 6 years or 6 months. Like it's kind of like whatever how your body reacts to the joint damage." So I think in that, like we drove home from DC with my parents that night, and I just like went to my room basically, which my room at the time was still like this like little relic of what my room was like growing up in high school, because my parents just like basically closed the door once I left, and then whenever I'd come back, it was like everything was still the same. So kind of just sat in there looking at like the calendar was still up from when it said like moved to England July 7th 2003 or something. Like there was all this like stuff just of like soccer and me growing up and having played, and just sat down and said, it doesn't make sense. Like, I want to be able to walk when I'm 30. I don't want to be uncomfortable. And like, as much as I love this, and how hard, like I've worked to finally get here and realize like a dream, like I have to be sensible about this. So I went downstairs and told my parents, like, I think I'm just going to like listen to that, and I'm going to go, I'm just going to go to school and try to figure out what I want to do next. And then, as you said, like Steve Rowley called again, basically, and derailed any plans I had of going to college again by saying, we'd love for you to start scouting for us if you're interested. So yeah, but it was hard, man. Just mentally, as you said, like it was, and I still I ended up having a huge surgery probably like 3 years later where they cut my bone, realign my joint, put a cadaver meniscus in as well, and have 4 screws, metal plate, like all that. And I still I don't play football anymore. I don't really run. I don't run. I don't say I don't really run. Like I haven't ran in like 5 or 6 years as well. So it is.
You cycle? Like, what do you do?
I've started cycling more and more. Yeah. And I try to eat well as well, which is a little bit harder than it sounds. But yeah, I do miss like just going out and playing football, and I used football for like everything, like an emotional out, right? Like if you want to be happy, go play football. If you're sad, go play football. If it's raining, go play football. If it's sunny, go play football. Like it was like everything, like it brought so much joy to me. And like that, I mean, to be completely honest, like that's probably been the hardest part to, and I'll never replace it, but the hardest part to like actually fill in my life is that like this activity that I always had for no matter how I felt, I could always go do, and it always made me feel good.
I think you're an unbelievable example, though, of someone that remained humble throughout, built relationships, whether it's your friendship with Philippe Senderos or Cesc Fabregas when you were coming through, your relationship with Steve Rowley, the fact that he'd call you after the fact, respected you so much and wanted you as part of his team. You obviously had some luck along the way, as everybody does who climbs to an elite level, but you also capitalized on that luck, built those relationships, remained humble throughout, and an example of how you can continue to get breaks going your way if you stay positive and just keep that attitude, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think people still ask me like, you went to Arsenal as a 17-year-old and you're still associated with, Arsenal. How is that? Like, especially in such a sport and an industry that's like quite transient and at times can be very, very short lived. Some managers last 5 games and then they're on to the next one. I think that's important. It goes into any industry. If you're, if you're humble, if you provide value to people, if you're, generally eager to just like improve yourself, but also just improve whoever it is that you're, working with and for, then I think it's much easier to establish relationships. I still like consider Cesc and Philippe, as you mentioned, and like Moritz Volz, a couple other players that I played with, like good friends of mine. And largely it's not like, we were friends before they won World Cups and before they were in Champions League finals and before they've won like every trophy under the sun. But it was just because like we were nice to each other. We enjoyed each other's companies. We like pushed each other. We challenged each other. And I think we genuinely cared for each other as well. And I think that applies to like, any industry or any friendship in life. Like you'll continue working if you work towards that.
Golden generation of players coming through and you were part of it. Special time, no doubt. Now you're living in London. You're loving London life. Hopefully we get you back to the US at some point. But what are you up to now? Because you've got a startup as well as the Arsenal Yankee, the book, which everybody should go and get. A fantastic read. You're working with Arsenal as a scout still. And you're also involved in a startup, which is doing what?
Yeah, so I do. I joined a couple of friends of mine back home that basically, and this has nothing to do with football, which is actually quite refreshing. But we basically help build, where we help brands and organizations organize all their digital assets so they can easily find them and streamline processes. Sounds very, very bizarre for me, but I've worked in several startups and provide more of like a strategy side and a growth side there. As you mentioned, like I still am involved with Arsenal as well. I can't talk too much about it, but I basically used a lot of the stuff that I learned in the startup world and kind of brought it over into the football world and started saying like, how can we improve process and build products that are that make us more efficient and help us make better decisions, especially with all the information that's out there now on players and clubs and tactics and opposition and data and all this good stuff, like bringing it all together so we can act on it fast and make better decisions. And I'm kind of basically working in that world now as being the guy that understands technology, but also can sit down with the football guys and have those conversations and kind of bridging those gaps.
Stay in school, folks. Danny Karbassiyoon, smart guy, combined it all. Fair play to you. Danny, absolute pleasure chatting to you. Remember, go and get the Arsenal Yankee. Really well worth a read. You'll enjoy every single bit of it. Danny, top man, thank you so much for taking the time amongst your busy schedule. But
Appreciate it, Kev. Great to see you, man. Thank you so much.
how cool was that? Wonderful to hear from Danny Karbassiyoon, a remarkable story from high school soccer in the US to playing for Arsenal, taking a ball from Fabregas, scoring on your debut. That is the stuff of dreams, and I do think there will be a movie about it. But for now, there's a book about it, The Arsenal Yankee. Go and get it and support Danny. Best of luck in all you're doing, bud. Appreciate the time. As for you guys, thank you for all the love on social media, and I really do want to encourage you and beg you to hit subscribe on YouTube and your favourite podcast platform. It means the world. It means I can keep these things going on a weekly basis. But for now, I love you. I'll leave you. Looking forward to next week already. Chat to you then. Take care.